Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Capital Budget Subcommittee. We'll go ahead and get started. We're going to have first the Department of Environment, and our budget analyst is Mr. Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now start to present the Department of Natural Resources Fiscal 2025 Capital Budget Analysis. So the very first page there, you see the overall request for fiscal 2025 is $123.9 million. In terms of letting the cat out of the bag here, the PAYGO recommended actions are to concur and the GO bond recommended actions are to concur as well. However, we do recommend a Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act provision to transfer $25 million from the dedicated purpose account to the general fund in fiscal 2024. So this is funding that was provided in fiscal 2023 for critical maintenance for the Department of Natural Resources. And it looks like they're not going to be able to use the money they already have for critical maintenance before this money then runs out. So we're recommending that transfer. On page 4, the Department of Natural Resources Capital Program funding, you see a substantial decrease between 24 and 25. So this is the general fund decrease due to the fact that there's not money going towards the two capital funds that were created by Chapter 39 of 2022, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, and there's also not the repayment money for the Rural Legacy Program as well, kind of like programmed in there in terms of the general funds. And then the transfer tax funding is also coming down, which we'll talk about in a second, and then you'll see it slowly rises over the time period shown. That's the yellow bar. That's why it increases slightly over the years. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the difference between 2024 and 2025 in terms of that revenue or revenues from the transfer tax. First line there shows a $53.1 million decrease in the estimate between the 2 years. That accounts for one of the $253 million components of the reduction. There's also a $201.5 million underattainment. So that's the comparison between the 2 years, So for fiscal 2024, there was an overattainment of $122 million. So in fiscal 2022, we actually received a lot more money than we expected to. So that was applied 2 years later, fiscal 2024. But in fiscal 2025, we're actually experiencing underattainment. So this means 2 years prior, in fiscal 2023, we received less money than we budgeted for, and that needs to be accounted for. And the difference between those is a $201.5 million swing. Therefore, overall change of $253 million. Exhibit 3 on page 6 reflects the overall programs funded with the transfer tax revenue. You see there's a substantial decrease between the 2 years. In terms of the programs, Program Open Space, Land Acquisition, and Local Program, just one thing to note here that the Appendix 2, the very back of the analysis, does have the Program Open Space local allocation by jurisdiction. In terms of the Program Open Space Public Access Program, this is the second year the funding has been broken out. It's always been provided for, it's just this is separately accounted for this time on page 8. And one thing to note there is the funding from this program has really been helpful for the Bohemia River State Park in terms of kind of getting that park up and running and providing for this upcoming fiscal year for access to the water bodies nearby. In terms of the Green Space Equity Program on page 9, just one comment there. This is a new allocation of funding. The Chapter 47 of 2023 provided for this funding up to a certain amount in particular years. And this funding requires the use of a Green Space Equity Advisory Board the Department of Natural Resources is putting together. They're also developing a grant application and policies related to this program. DLS recommends that the agency comments on the status of those two components. In terms of the Natural Resources Development Fund on page 10, I'd like to draw your attention though onto page 11, Exhibit 4 shows the allocation of the Natural Resources Development Fund by program or purpose over the next number of years. And what you're seeing here, starting in fiscal 2018 and 2019, is that mostly was used for improvements in parks. So this is kind of your standard improvement in terms of visitor centers or new bathrooms. But then over time, there's been more allocation of funding going towards the State Park Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund, and then even more recently to the dam assessments and rehabilitation. So you see all the way over in the far right, fiscal 2026 through fiscal 2029, those regional projects for improvements in the state parks are almost completely squeezed out, it seems. All right, moving now to the Ocean City Beach. There's also a pre-authorization for Elk Neck State Park for that particular program. For Ocean City Beach maintenance, on page 13, just the one note there that the next planned beach replenishment project is scheduled for fiscal 2026. That's going to cost around $18 million to provide for the sandy beaches at Ocean City. In terms of the Waterway Improvement Fund on page 14 and page 15, What you're seeing here is an increase in the amount of funding for the program, reflects the fact that during the pandemic, there were a lot of boat sales and brought in vessel excise tax revenue that the administration is now budgeting over a number of years to kind of allocate that funding as an increase for the capital improvement program. And then the 2024 project list has been resolved. So thank you very much to the Department of Budget and Management for that. In terms of the oyster restoration program on page 17, there's a decrease or increase in less money for the program due to a change in the timing for the Minokan River Sanctuary in terms of the work being done there. The high note here, I'd highlight that the Harris Creek Sanctuary has actually been successfully restored. So that's one of the 5 restorations that were to be completed as part of the kind of Chesapeake Bay Agreement. So we're down to 4 more to go, and they're looking pretty good in terms of the SPAT kind of set each year. So that's an encouraging sign. DLS recommends that DNR comment on the status of the Maryland Oyster Shell and Substrate Task Force that was created by executive order signed July 2023. The first issue starts on page 19. This concerns the spending from the funding that was received for Chapter 39 of 2022. That's the Great Maryland Outdoors Act. So there's now legislation to push out the deadline for the Park System Critical Maintenance Fund spending from July 1, 2026, which is a very tight timeline in terms of that money being spent, to July 1, 2029. So that gives the agency more time to spend that Park System Critical Maintenance funding, but obviously is not in accord with the General Assembly's interest in reducing that critical maintenance backlog by fiscal 2026. The legislation also extends the purposes and authorized uses of the Park System Capital Improvements and Acquisition Fund to include other DNR lands, most within the Park Service portfolio. And finally, it does extend the deadline for the completion of the Comprehensive Long-Range Strategic Plan. The Department of Legislative Services recommends that the General Assembly, with the understanding that it's unlikely that all of that money will be spent, certainly before fiscal 29, since it's being pushed out, that there's an additional $25 million in the dedicated purpose account that only has a 4-year lifetime. So that would, in theory, would be revert to the stabilization account by 2027. Therefore, it does not look like that money would be used in the time that would be allowed for it. Therefore, DLS recommends that the General Assembly adopt that BRFA provision discussed earlier. The second issue concerns the land preservation and recreation plan. So this is the big plan looking at kind of how we're doing with land preservation and recreation in Maryland. It takes a lot of those county plans and then sort of aggregates the information there, and then gives us kind of a big picture look at how we're doing in terms of the proximity and equity too for where the parks are located to where people are. However, this has been delayed as a result of some challenges with the procurement. DLS recommends that DNR comment on the reasons for that delay and on the timing of the comprehensive long-range strategic plan that is also anticipated to be kind of completed in the same time frame. That's any questions. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you for the analysis, Mr. Gray. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Mr. Gray on the analysis? Thank you. This afternoon, we have joining us the Secretary of Natural Resources, Secretary Josh Kurtz. Thank you very much for being here.
Good afternoon, Chair Chang, Vice Chair Lewis, and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined today by Lauren Buckmaster, who's our Director of Fiscal and Accounting and Administrative Services at the Department of Natural Resources for any technical questions. If it's all right with the chair, I just wanted to make a couple brief opening remarks and then get into the recommendations. So just to orient everyone to the capital programs that we have at the department, our projects and our programs are spent in every county and every jurisdiction in the state. I think that's the great thing about our money is it's primarily spent in partnership with communities and with the counties. When you look at examples of that, we have land acquisition protections through program open space, both local and state side, as well as the Baltimore City Direct Grant. So we're moving those funds all over the state. We have development and public access projects. So the goal of that is as we protect and we hold lands and aquatic resources for people, we are continuously adding opportunities for them to access that in a more equitable manner. We also have critical maintenance projects and waterway improvement projects. Basically, think about these as ways that we are working to improve and sustain the things in which that we hold in trust for all Maryland residents. And then obviously our oyster restoration projects, which have been some of our most successful capital projects when you look at ecological, economic, and social benefit. With that, I also just wanted to touch on, I mean, obviously for Mr. Gray's analysis, the program open space underattainment is significant, paired with the overattainment, overestimation in previous years, really looking at $83.3 million change. So we've been thinking about that very, very heavily in our operating and capital budget, and a lot of our answers will reflect that. So just wanted to give you that initial caveat. And if it's all right, I'll step into the analysis. Thank you. So for the PAYGO and GEO bond recommended actions, we agree with DLS on those. But for the BRFA recommendation related to the 25 million in the dedicated purpose account, we respectfully disagree with that recommendation. And I think it's important when you look at our capital budget, you see critical maintenance in a few different places, and those are relating to different projects. So the Great Maryland Outdoors Act critical maintenance was a list of $70 million of projects that were set forth just for that list to clear that backlog. When we complete that, we will have cleared the backlog of critical maintenance issues. But that doesn't stop us from accruing more critical maintenance issues as time goes on. And that 25 million in the dedicated purpose account is going to 15 projects to help us do that. Some of them are some significant investments in state infrastructure. For example, $14 million to Summers Cove to steady the bulkhead. There are some very large projects in that dedicated purpose account that are going to set us up for very long-term success for some of these pieces of infrastructure that we hold. Turning our attention to the Green Space Equity Program, the administration proposed to fully fund Green Space Equity with $5 million this year. And I wanted to touch on the advisory board. Our first meeting is going to be on March 11th. We have nearly all the members appointed, and we're continuing to work with the House and Senate leadership to finish out the appointments. To prepare for that, we have drafted a grant application and associated policies and procedures the department will need to ratify to move that project forward. And we're looking forward to working with the advisory commission once that's complete. Turning our attention to the Waterway Improvement Program, and we provided that project list that Mr. Gray referenced. This is another program that is a user pay, user benefit, and a lot of our programs are that. What we do with these projects is we work in places that the Army Corps does not. We provide greater access to the water and to our resources. There's one thing we know, I think everybody knows, is that the ability to access the bay is becoming further and further limited, and this fund is critically important to ensuring people have access to that. Next is the Maryland Oyster Shell and Substrate Task Force. We started meeting in October of 2023. We are meeting bi-weekly, and the goal is to have our report out before the December deadline. What we're doing is evaluating the many different types of hard surface, whether that be shell, imported shell, or innovative substrate, and ensuring that what we have is basically a shell diet or a shell account that is constantly accruing rather than constantly losing. And so this is going to be a short-term kind of long-term strategy to ensure we have enough hard bottom to catch the spat set. This year, we're currently in a historic spat set, so we need more hard bottom for that. And the last piece I wanted to touch on in the analysis is related to the land preservation and recreation plan. So a couple reasons for that delay. One is we took a holistic look at the strategic plans that we have across the department for land preservation, for planning for our parks, our forests, our wildlife management areas, and those do not align. So the GMOA legislation that we have, this delay, we're working to align that. So we're doing these plans at the same time, so that we're able to think about these things more holistically. We also had some significant staffing challenges in terms of vacancies in our leadership when we started, and we currently, to prepare for this, have an RFP out for a contractor, and the bids are due March 29th of this year. So we are actively working to get that under contract so we can meet those goals. With that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Secretary Kurtz. Are there any questions from members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee for Secretary Kurtz? Great. Thank you very much. This afternoon, we have joining us witnesses who provide verbal testimony. If they could all please come up. We have Owen Bailey with the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, Jessica Lays, Maryland Association of County and Park and Recreation Administrator, and also Joel Dunn with Chesapeake Conservancy. And if each witness could provide 2-minute testimony, that'd be great. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Owen Bailey. I'm the Director of Land Use and Policy for the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. as well as Chair of Partners for Open Space, which is a statewide coalition advocating for and defending open space in Maryland and protecting the transfer tax and the various programs it funds, such as local and stateside program open space. Program open space has been a powerful mechanism for achieving our goals outlined in the Maryland the Beautiful Act. Maryland is close to achieving 30 by 30, thanks in part to program open space. And if we have any hope of achieving 40% by 2040, we will need both local and stateside POS on top of other funding. Funding for POS is also essential in developing trails in our counties. One element that came out of the land preservation parks and recreation plans pretty unanimously across the state is the need for not only more trails, but longer trails and trails that connect to more places. And to give an example, Queen Anne's County has been a shining example on the Eastern Shore, developing its Cross Island and South Island trail networks, which one day they hope to connect the two. Doing so will give residents in the area means for active transportation, economic development, equitable access to local parks, and the means for healthier lifestyles as trails encourage physical activity. So we thank you and hope for a favorable rule.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Lays, and I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Association of Parks and Recreation Administrators, known as MACRA. MACRA represents Parks and Recreation departments in 23 counties and Baltimore City. We strongly support the capital budget for the Department of Natural Resources. Our partnership with DNR is essential to the residents in the state of Maryland. We share the mission to secure a sustainable future for our environment, society, and economy by preserving, protecting, restoring, and enhancing Maryland's natural resources. MACRA relies on the state partnership for fair and equitable investment into our public land. Local POS is essential to Maryland counties. It allows for consistent acquisition and development of recreation and parks amenities to meet the needs of the residents. POS promotes equity in the investment statewide, eliminating the tax-based bias through defined formula-driven funding, and requires access for all. POS also supports projects to enhance environmental resilience, including shoreline restoration, stormwater management, forestry, and conservation of green space. We are very concerned about the reduction in local POS driven by the FY23 underattainment coupled with the FY25 real property transfer tax estimates. The local distribution of POS funding decreases by more than 60% in FY25. While we appreciate the increased funding of the past 2 years, this drastic decrease will force consequential decisions throughout the state. It will hinder the ability of counties to meet their land acquisition goals as identified in their land preservation, parks and recreation plans, as well as provide recreational amenities such as playgrounds, athletic fields, and recreational facilities in most underserved communities. MACRA urges this committee to support the full funding of local POS and to continue to support the partnerships between the state and the counties. Thank you.
Chairman Chang and subcommittee members, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony today. For the record, I'm Joel Dunn, a Maryland resident and president and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy. I'm also the co-convener of the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, which is a coalition of organizations from across the Chesapeake Bay watershed devoted to protecting 30% of our lands and waters in the Chesapeake. We wish to acknowledge the diligent work of the DLS analysts and of course the hard work of your members and of your subcommittee. We support Secretary Kurtz's responses to your analysts' report. For the reasons described below, we disagree with the DLS report on POS pay-go operating budget analysis. And while it's part of the DNR proposed operating budget, I'd like to express our respectful disagreement with the analysts' recommendations that a total of $7.5 million in general funds go to park and forest service budgets be transferred to the state general fund and replaced with POS funds from the DNR acquisition balance. Those POS funds are primarily used for capital projects. Using DNR's POS funds for salaries and benefits will deplete DNR's acquisition funds immediately and over time as salaries increase. Program Open Space was enacted in 1969, as you know, with one simple but compelling and enduring goal, As an acre of land is converted to development, an acre is conserved in open space. There should be there have been periods where this goal has been achieved, but the goal should be should continue to serve as our North Star. By using the funds of 0.5% of state transfer tax, the revenues will rise and decline with the market as intended. As committee members know, we have experienced in the recent years substantial revenue increases followed by significant revenue decreases starting in fiscal years 23, 24, and 25 and beyond. My point is there's increasing demands for funds from the DNR share of program open space, and we really want you to maintain course with the program to try and achieve the goals of protecting 30% of Maryland's lands by 2030 and 40% by 2040. Those demands will continue to grow. We appreciate your consideration of our comments.
Great. Thank you very much to all the witnesses. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for the witnesses? Great. Thank you very much. That concludes the budget hearing for Department of Natural Resources. Committee will now move on to the Department of Environment. And our budget analyst is Mr. Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of the Environment's or MDE's fiscal 2025 budget analysis. On page 1, you see there the overall allowance is $428 million for the programs shown. In terms of the recommended actions on page 2, DLS does recommend concurring with the governor's PAYGO and GEO bond authorizations and appropriations. Exhibit 1 on page 3 gives a big picture in terms of the CIP, Capital Improvement Program, for MDE's capital programs. What you're seeing there over the years is that significant amount of federal funds is coming in terms of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but that funding will then run out after 2027. So then you see the kind of green bar comes down substantially in 28 and 29, then don't reflect that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. That's why the numbers come down those years. Exhibit 2 on page 4 reflects the funding changes for the major programs, the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund, $25.5 million decrease, $53 million increase for the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, and a $6.2 million decrease for the Bay Restoration Fund wastewater projects. In terms of the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund, on page 6, Exhibit 3 reflects the federal funding that's coming in for this program. You see there's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, general supplemental funding around $55 million. And then there's also emerging contaminants money of $5.1 million, reflecting that requires matching funding for at least one of those. Department of Legislative Services recommends the MDE comment on the overall plan for the allocation of the emerging contaminants funding, so we have not seen that yet. In terms of the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, on page 9 reflects the same exhibit in terms of the allocation of federal funding and the matching state funding. There's emerging contaminants funding noted here, as well as lead service line funding, which we'll talk about in a second. In terms of MDE's encumbrances for the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, on page 10, DLS does recommend MDE comment on why the encumbrances decreased from $12.9 million in fiscal 2022, which is already an incredibly low number, to only $1.5 million in fiscal 2023. DLS also recommends that MDE comment on page 10 on the plans for allocating the federal IIJA lead service line replacement and emerging contaminants funding to Maryland jurisdictions, whether Maryland provided updated service line information to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in fall 2023, and the status of the statewide lead service line survey required by the EPA by October 2024. In terms of the Bay Restoration Funds, just drop down to page 13. DLS recommends that MDE comment on the outcome of its review of third-party engineering reports and facility improvement plans as part of its permit renewals for plants with consistent non-compliant history during the previous permit cycle, and on the outcome of the quarterly review of discharge monitoring report data for wastewater treatment plants. In addition, DLS recommends MDE comment on the findings and the staffing reports for the Back River and Patapsco wastewater treatment plants and what possible lessons learned are generally applicable to expert staffing shortages throughout the industry. All right, and then page 14, DLS recommended that the MDE comment when the January 2024 Bay Restoration Fund Advisory Committee Annual Status Report would be submitted and posted online, and received that today. Thank you very much. And in terms of the Comprehensive Flood Management Program, on page 20, DLS recommends that MDE comments on the Middle Branch Resiliency Initiative projects, a massive project, $120.4 million with a number of stakeholders. It represents the biggest project that I've seen so far in terms of flood mitigation type work. We just comment on that particular project, how it came together, whether there's possibilities for future projects like that in other areas. And then on page 21, there's the one issue here, the General Assembly, or actually the Budget Committee, excuse me, did request information on federal emerging contaminants funding allocation and award report. That report has not been submitted, and DLS recommends that the agency comment on when that report will be submitted. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Are there any questions from the members of the committee for Mr. Gray on the analysis? Great. This afternoon, we have from the Secretary of Environment, Secretary Serena. Well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for being here.
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you, Chair and members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to speak about MDE's capital budget. For the record, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment. Here with me, I have Suzanne Dorsey, Deputy Secretary, and Jeff Brett, who's the Acting Budget Director. Maryland's Department of Environment's fiscal year 2025 proposed capital budget continues the state's strong investment in the environment and public health. The budget consists of grant and loan funding for capital construction projects that improve water quality, protect public health, and provide safe drinking water and increase the resilience of the built and natural environment. This budget proposal reaffirms my department's commitment to be fiscally disciplined while also making critical investments in gray, green, and blue environmental infrastructure that matters most to Marylanders. So I'm really happy to be here today to just talk briefly about the budget and the funding of these projects and working in partnership with local governments, because that's actually how we move Maryland forward. So our capital budget request is for $428 million across 8 capital funding programs. The majority of the funding is provided to local governments for capital projects that they are undertaking to help them meet their critical needs for water, sewer, flooding, and green infrastructure. We use a data-driven competitive process for funding the applications that incorporates things or key criterion like we look at cost effectiveness, public health risk, equity, climate resilience, and sustainability. So we do that, and then we decide on the direction of state resources toward those projects that need it the most. We're also maximizing federal funding as well, because we need to ensure that we're taking advantage of every single federal dollar that's available. Governor Moore expects this administration to do that, and we're taking full advantage of it. And because of his support and his expectations to use and get as much federal funding as we can, we've already secured $300 million in federal IIJA and IRA funding since Governor Moore took office. So the 2 revolving loan fund program requests includes additional funding that MDE is receiving from the bipartisan infrastructure law for local government projects, and that includes more than $75 million for 13 local government projects for lead service line inventories and replacements, and more than $57 million for 13 local government projects to address PFAS compounds in our drinking water. We also recently indicated our intention to apply for an additional $195 million from the US EPA from their climate pollution reduction grant. And we will continue to apply for funding as it becomes available. And just as we've secured this level of funding, we're also ready to work with local governments, and we're happy to help them find additional funding as well, just as we have done. So those targeted investments and strategy choices in this capital budget will make our communities safer, make us more competitive, and strengthen our economy and protect the environment. And it connects directly with our priorities, starting with leaving no one behind. The budget includes funding for communities in all parts of Maryland, from Western Maryland, Central, Southern, and Eastern Shore. This funding is also for all all types of communities, urban, suburban, rural. We're also ensuring that we're spreading those funds to communities that need it most. And we have to ensure that we are adhering to the Biden administration's requirement to spend or use 40% of that federal funding towards underserved and overburdened communities. And I'm happy to say we exceeded that goal. So we're giving more like 45% to those communities. And it also connects to our priorities of making communities safer. As I mentioned earlier, this budget includes funding for local governments to perform the lead service line inventories so that we can help them replace them. So these improvements reduce the exposure of Marylanders, including young children who are most vulnerable to lead in drinking water. There is also funding to address other public health issues that will make Maryland's communities safer, such as reducing exposure to PFAS chemicals and reducing sewage overflows. And also making Maryland more competitive and strengthening the economy is another key priority. So the funding for local government projects will create opportunities for contracts, including services for like engineering firms, environmental consulting firms, and a whole lot more, and opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. And of course, the main priority is protecting the environment. So our mission is to protect and restore the environment for the health and well-being of all Marylanders. Protecting the environment is really ingrained in all that we do at MDE, our day-to-day work. That's what we're here for. So this includes our capital funding, so that the capital funding that we're talking about today will help us in our efforts to clean up the Chesapeake Bay and make those investments in water infrastructure that communities and counties need so badly. And it's going to help us address climate change as well. So that's the end. But in terms of the DLS analysis, thank you again. I always thank you, Andrew Gray, for your analysis, which is always on point. But we did submit responses to those recommendations. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Are there any questions for Madam Secretary of the agency? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have listed a witness for the Maryland Department of the Environment, Renard Brown. Is Renard Brown here? Okay, that concludes the budget hearing for Maryland Department of the Environment. The committee will now move on to the Interagency Commission on School Construction. Our budget analyst is Laura Hyde.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I'm Laura Hyde for the Department of Legislative Services, presenting the budget for the Interagency Commission on School Construction. So we're starting on page 1 with the capital budget summary. In fiscal 2025, this capital improvement program for IAC totals $905 million, which is a decrease of about $146 million or 14% from fiscal 2024. The breakout of these funding sources is on page 2. Where you can see that the funding is almost equally divided between GO bonds for the school construction programs and then the estimated issuance of revenue bonds for Build to Learn. Turning to page 4, under the recommended actions in the fiscal 2025 CIP is introduced due to the continued development of the revolving loan fund. The governor recommended that funding for this program be delayed by 1 year. Because the allowance is in PAYGO general funds, the action is in the 2024 BRFA and is seen here as a contingent reduction of $10 million. Additionally, because this program received funding in previous years that has not been utilized, DLS is further recommending that $20 million in unexpended funds be reduced from the 2024 budget. DLS also recommends approving all 2025 GO bond and revenue bond authorizations for the school construction programs in the CIP. Turning to page 7, Exhibit 2, this graph shows the new construction, school construction funding by source from fiscal 2020 to 2025. The black line indicates legislative intent that school construction funding total $400 million in fiscal 2020 through 2022 and $450 million in fiscal 2023 and beyond. This exhibit shows that for all years except for fiscal 2020, the governor's CIP met the legislative intent. With the addition of the COP Priority Fund, the fiscal 2025 CIP meets the $450 million legislative intent in fiscal 25 and future years, except for fiscal 2026, in which the current allocation totals $392.6 million. Turning to page 8, Exhibit 3, this exhibit shows the 100% recommendations for the public school construction program. The 75% recommendations were approved in December 2023, and the 100% recommendations will be finalized in May 2024. Without recycled funds, as programmed in the CIP, the fiscal 2025 allowance allows for $313.9 million in GO bonds, but with recycled funds, which includes funds reserves for LEAs and for the EGRC supplemental grant program, the funding totals $364.9 million. Turning to page 11, Exhibit 4, this is the EGRC supplemental grant program, which receives $40 million in GO bonds and meets the fiscal 2025 mandate for this program. The bold language on this page asks IEC to comment on why the CIP reports the program has an unexpended balance of over $100 million. Turning to page 13, Exhibit 5, this is the Healthy Schools Facility Fund. This exhibit shows that a total of $285 million has been allocated to this program since fiscal 2021, with the current CIP allowance of $90 million in GO bonds meeting the mandate for this program. Of this amount, $80 million is American Rescue Plan Act federal funding, which must be expended by January 2025. A related item is Exhibit 6 on page 14, which shows that $276 million or 97% of funding for healthy schools has been encumbered by LEAs for 3 types of expenses: roofs and related items, air conditioning and heating, and windows and doors. The bold language on this page asks IEC to explain what safeguards the agency has in place to ensure that LEAs expend federal funds by the January 2025 deadline. Turning to page 15, Exhibit 7. This exhibit shows projected allocations by LEA for the Aging Schools program, which receives $6 million in GO bonds and meets the mandated amount for this program in fiscal 2025. Turn to page 17, Exhibit 8. This exhibit shows the allocations for the DeGrange Non-Public Aging Schools program. This is not a program in statute, but receives $3.5 million in GO bonds in the CIP. The fiscal 2025 capital budget bill also restores language regarding criteria for participation in this program, which can be seen on page 16. Turning to page 19, Exhibit 9. This exhibit shows that to date revenue bonds issued for Build to Learn total $699 million. These bonds were last issued in fiscal 2022, but the current CIP programs an additional $425 million for this purpose in fiscal 2025. Exhibit 10 on page 20 is a related exhibit with the projected $1.7 billion for Build to Learn projects, allocations for projects by LEA approved to date, which total approximately $1 billion, and the projected amount remaining to be allocated to LEAs, assuming the $1.7 billion issuance, which is approximately $700 million. Page 21 and 22 have information about the Prince George's County P3 program, which has 8 new schools approved in September 23, and the revolving loan fund, which I discussed earlier. The bold language on page 22 asks IAC to comment on the agency's timeline for the implementation of the revolving loan fund and the DLS recommendations mentioned previously. Turning to page 23, this is Exhibit 11. This exhibit shows the allocations for the fiscal 2023 pass-through grants, which totaled $237 million, with all funding encumbered for that purpose. Turning to page 24, Exhibit 12. This exhibit shows unexpended balances by fiscal year and program as reported in the fiscal 2025 CIP. The total amount of $747 million includes funding allocated prior to fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2023. Because capital funding is not expended with 7 years, is eligible to be returned to the unreserved statewide contingency account. The bold language on the bottom of page 24 asks IAC to comment on these balances and their intended uses. A related item is on page 25, Exhibit 13, which shows contingency fund balances as reported by IAC. The balance is not shown correctly in the exhibit. It should be $58.2 million. But the bold language on the bottom of page 25 asks IAC to comment on these balances, as well as the reason that balances over 7 years old have not been returned to the unreserved statewide contingency account. Turning to page 26. Exhibit 14, this is under measures, performance measures and outputs. This graph shows the deviation from the statewide average square footage in fiscal 2005 to fiscal 2023, statewide square footage by LEA. The black line is the statewide average of square footage in fiscal 2005, which was 24 years. The blue bars are the average per LEA in fiscal 25, and then the green bars are the average in fiscal 2023. So in fiscal 23, the statewide average age of square footage was 31 years. Exhibit 15 on page 26 shows LEA scores on the IAC maintenance effectiveness assessment for fiscal 2023, which has an average score for all LEAs of 70%. This chart indicates that out of 24 LEAs, 18 scored above or at this average and 6 scored below. Appendices 1 and 2 on pages 30 and 31 shows school construction funding by LEA from fiscals 1973 to 24, and then the state cost share by LEA. This ends my presentation, and I stand for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Hyde, for the analysis. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much. This afternoon, we have joining us Alex Donahue, the Executive Director, and also the Honorable Senator Ed Casemeyer, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and fellow committee members. It's a pleasure to be here to present our capital budget request. We want to thank Laura for her work. The staff has told me it's been a pleasure to work with her during the session and during the summer season. With me today is our Executive Director, Alex Donahue, our Deputy Director, Cassandra Mascara is down there. Our funding program manager, Arabia Davis, has been with us quite a while, and our capital project director, Melissa Wilfong. I want to say before Alex gets into his comments on Laura's statements that it's been a real pleasure working with these individuals. Alex has been with us a couple of years now and developed a tremendous staff. And I know when I was around, there were lots of irritations because we didn't think the IAC was responsive, and that's something we've tried to direct our attention to in the last couple of years. Is that we want to be an entity that helps LEAs find solutions to their needs and not be somebody who appears to be getting in the way and causing trouble. So that's the spirit of the mission that we have. Alex has visited many local governments and superintendents. We continue to want to make that a regular thing that we do every year. And I'm just very proud of all the work they've done. And the school systems, although there's a lot of money that you all appropriate to us, the school systems still need a lot of money for improvements and new schools and for renovations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for this time. Before we respond to the analysis, I'd like to share a little bit about the big things that have been going on at the IAC and in school construction. We have two primary areas of activity. First, getting the greatest possible return from the appropriated funds. And second, providing technical assistance to LEAs and counties to support effective school portfolio management. This past year, in the service of both, as well as of good government, we have conducted an extensive outreach effort to engage with all the major stakeholder groups, including LEAs, the school districts, first and foremost, but also the county governments, and ideally in the same room at the same time. Just one example is the recent two-day visit that Chair Casemeyer and I and staff made to Worcester County, in which we visited 8 of the county's 14 schools and then met with the superintendent, member of the school board, the county commission president, county administrators, and members of Senator Carrozza's staff all together. I'm having other similar conversations in a number of other counties as well. This engagement and three-way communication is leading slowly but surely to the growth of real and effective three-way collaborative partnerships, and I'm very pleased with the progress we're making. We've also been engaging with MABE, MACO, ASBO, and the Superintendent's Association through multiple presentations and meetings with each in the last year. Finally, it has been my real pleasure to have responded to a large and growing number of positive, well, almost all positive, inquiries from senators and delegates. This enhanced communication going both directions is making the agency a strong force for positive change to the benefit of all of Maryland's public pre-K through 12 students. Now, with regard to the legislative analysis, and thank you, Laura, our written response is thorough and a little lengthy, so I won't go through those responses now. But in general, there are a couple of themes I'd like to take a minute to discuss. One question we received in the analysis and that we receive often is about the unencumbered and unexpended balances in our programs. I can assure you that these balances do not represent a lack of need on the part of the LEAs. The LEAs in the state collectively face a massive amount of school facilities need that can be divided roughly into three buckets. One, the growing condition deficiencies. Second, the need to add facility space to support delivery of the expanded pre-K programming required under the blueprint. And third, the eventual but coming need to make costly facilities changes to increase energy efficiency and decarbonize to meet the state's adopted climate protection goals. The IAC is working this year to estimate the cost of the need in each of those three buckets to inform budget development in the coming cycles. There's a lot more work to be done here, but I hope to have more numbers this fall to share with the subcommittee. The second question we received is about how we track and report remaining fund balances and reverted fund information. Unfortunately, the IAC is currently utilizing a legacy capital accounting system that does not meet all of our reporting and tracking needs. But very fortunately, we're in the final stages of implementing a new business management system that will replace this functionality and provide world's better process management, reporting, tracking, and transparency. It will benefit the General Assembly as well as the agency and the school districts. Finally, I do want to respond to the one recommendation in the analysis that there be an FY 2025 reduction of 10 million to the IAC's revolving loan fund and a negative deficiency of 20 million, which would result in the fund containing 40 million. Although we believe that there is a significant need on the part of the LEAs for revolving loan funds, we also recognize that a delay in our implementation of the program due to the complexity of rolling out a loan program as opposed to our typical grant programs has led to more funds being available at a single point in time than was envisioned for the program. And so we do not object to the DLS recommendation. Mr. Chair, I know this has been a lot, so I'll wrap up here. But I really appreciate this time to share this update with you, and it is our privilege to stand for any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Donahue, and also Chair Casemeyer. Are there any questions from subcommittee? Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see you all. I miss the budget analysis and the EED, not being on the subcommittee anymore. But I just had two quick questions for you, and one I'm sure is probably not surprising. I really appreciated the work of the agency in partnership on the bill that we passed a couple of years ago around including safe routes to school and the analysis of the walk shed in approving plans for new buildings. I was just wondering if you could give us an update on how that's rolling out and if there's been any positive examples of it so far.
So yes, in a nutshell, we are implementing that in the CIP. We're taking plans from the school districts on the applicable or the eligible projects. We have not seen any concerns or issues so far. It is again a compliance review. It's not so much of a qualitative review, so we're not, stepping into that area of expertise for them. However, it is moving forward, and certainly if there's any other information you would like, happy to pull that together and send it to you.
That would be great. And then just another question. I know we passed a bill in 2022 that was a priority of our former chair around updating sort of the way that you all are doing maintenance analyses of schools and looking at things like air quality and a whole host of factors. I know it's not quite on the books yet in terms of ramping it up, but I was wondering if you could talk about how that process has been has it been underway and what's the process look like?
Yes, we have been amending our process for our statewide facility assessment to collect from each LEA the data where they have concerns about their indoor air quality and other related issues for learning environments specifically the items listed in that statute from 2 years ago. And we are getting some good data back from them. We are also now in full implementation of that process with our own in-house teams rather than a contractor. So we're getting a much closer look. We're getting much better data now. It's not enough to, give an in-depth quantitative report, for example, but it is coming along, and it will inform addressing issues in those areas. And there are other conversations going on too, ongoingly right now with Senator Fellman's staff around some questions around IAQ and others.
That would be great. I would love to follow up with you specifically on the indoor air quality piece. So would love
Happy to do
love
that.
have a
Thank you.
conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any other questions from members of the subcommittee for the panel? Great. Thank you very much, Chair Catesmeyer, and also Executive.
Thank you
Mayor
very
Donahue.
much.
We have
Thank you.
another witness, Wanda Best with the Upton Planning Committee Incorporated. Ms. Wanda Best. That concludes the budget hearing for the Interagency Commission on School Construction. The committee will now move on to the last agency, which is Department of Housing and Community Development. And our budget analyst is Emily Hasell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Emily Hasell, and I'm presenting the capital budget analysis for the Department of Housing and Community Development. On pages 1 and 2, you can see that the fiscal 2025 capital budget includes funding for 17 programs at DHCD, totaling $574.4 million. I'm going to jump ahead a bit to page 5. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows DHCD's capital budget over the last several years. You can see that nearly $575 million proposed for fiscal 2025 is an all-time high, and nearly triple the amount that had been planned for fiscal 2025 in last year's CIP. This increase includes enhancements for rental housing, for community development programs, particularly in Baltimore City, and also for broadband, all three of which I'll come back to and discuss in greater detail in a minute. On page 6, Exhibit 3 shows that increased funding over the amount previously planned continues beyond fiscal 2025 as well throughout the out years of the CIP planning period. Moving ahead again to page 8, there's a section discussing new and increased mandates in fiscal 2025. First, legislation last session established the Business Facade Improvement Program and mandated $5 million annually beginning in fiscal 2025. DHCD distributes funds to counties and municipalities under this program, which then award grants to local businesses. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, or BRFA, includes a provision that would authorize the use of bonds to fulfill the mandate. And the fiscal 2025 budget does include $5 million in GEO bonds for the program, as well as a $5 million reduction in PAYGO general funds contingent on the BRFA. DLS recommends deleting the $5 million in general funds that are contingently reduced. The Business Facade Improvement Program would remain fully funded with $5 million in GEO bonds. There was also legislation last session that increased the mandate for the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Program, known as NED, from $7 million to $12 million annually, and the fiscal 2025 budget fully funds the mandate at the $12 million level. Moving ahead again to page 12, the first issue in the analysis relates to rental housing programs. As shown in Exhibit 6 on page 13, funding for rental housing programs has increased significantly over the past several years. Fiscal 2025 funding totals $138.5 million, which is a 50% increase over fiscal 2024. The CIP plans gradually decreasing funding in the out years, but at levels still far above what had been planned previously. Compared to last year's CIP, this year's CIP plans nearly $200 million more for rental housing programs over the 4 years the two plans overlap. The largest component of DHCD's rental housing programs is Rental Housing Works, which receives $110 million in GEO bonds in fiscal 2025. The program provides loans to both nonprofit and for-profit developers for projects that are financed using 4% low-income housing tax credits and DHCD's multifamily bond program. Exhibit 7 on page 14 shows data both on the projects funded to date through Rental Housing Works, as well as the pipeline of upcoming projects. The pipeline exceeds $260 million for projects to create or rehabilitate more than 8,700 housing units. DHCD estimates that Maryland has a housing shortage of at least 96,000 units, while some other estimates are higher. For example, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition estimates a shortfall in Maryland of more than 146,000 affordable units. Turning to page 15, the second issue in the analysis relates to increased funding for Baltimore City. Out of the $159 million increase in combined GO bonds and PAYCO general funds for DHCD programs compared to the planned amount, $59 million is designated for projects in Baltimore City or the Baltimore region. In total, DHCD's fiscal 2025 capital budget includes $86 million directed to the Baltimore region. That includes $50 million for Project CORE, $27 million for the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, known as Bernie, and $9 million for the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore. This represents a 110% increase over the $41 million provided for these programs in fiscal 24. The increased level of funding for Bernie and Project CORE continues annually throughout the out years of the CIP, while fiscal 2025 is the final year of planned funding for the Downtown Partnership. Project CORE funds blight removal and redevelopment in Baltimore City, and the fiscal 2025 budget includes $50 million for Project CORE compared to $20 million provided in fiscal 2024. Baltimore City has recently renewed efforts to address vacant properties at scale, including announcing a plan to significantly increase funding to a total of $3 billion over 15 years to tackle the problem with a whole blocks approach. The plan includes a request for $900 million in state funds over the 15-year period. If continued at the same level of $50 million annually as planned in the CIP, the state contribution would total $750 million over the 15-year period. Exhibit 8 on page 16 shows a decline in total vacant building notices in Baltimore City over the last few years. More than 3,500 demolitions and 8,600 rehabilitations took place over this period from calendar 2016 to 2023. On the top of page 17, there's a brief discussion of Bernie. Bernie provides grants to fund revitalization and sustainable community areas in Anne Arundel and Baltimore counties and in Baltimore City. Funding is mandated at $12 million annually. The fiscal 2025 budget includes $27 million in GO bonds, and DLS recommends reducing the GO bond funding for Bernie by $15 million to the mandated level due to competing priorities for funding. The final issue in the analysis relates to broadband. In recent years, broadband programs have received nearly $400 million from the American Rescue Plan Act and are expected to receive nearly $300 million from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Exhibit 9 on page 18 shows funding from all sources for broadband programs across DHCD's operating and capital budgets through the fiscal 2025 allowance, totaling more than $710 million. The operating programs have been discussed in the operating budget analysis for DHCD. DHCD's capital budget includes the $268 million expected from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. Those funds are split across fiscal 2024 and 2025. Exhibit 10 on page 19 shows the broadband programs funded in DHCD's capital budget. As you can see, the Connect Maryland program has awarded nearly all of its allocated funding. The remaining approximately $3 million will be allocated to bring connectivity to Smith Island, and DHCD expects to announce an award for that project very soon. $45 million has been allocated to expand service to public housing. DHCD received 7 applications totaling $22 million for the available $45 million. The department anticipates announcing the awards very soon and opening a second round of applications that will be also open to affordable housing units owned by nonprofits in addition to public housing. $24 million has been allocated to reach difficult to serve properties. DHCD received 16 applications totaling $16.7 million for that funding. And again, awards are expected to be announced soon, and DHCD plans to run a second round of applications. This funding I just discussed is primarily from the American Rescue Plan Act, and I'll turn now to the anticipated funding coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act on page 20. As I said, DHCD will receive $268 million for the BEAD program. In November, DHCD published its draft plan for the BEAD program, and estimates that the BEAD allocation will be sufficient to fund fiber to the premises for the vast majority of unserved locations in the state. The department's final proposal will be due in December 2024 and will include the anticipated provisional awards for projects. DHCD anticipates making the final awards in the first quarter of calendar 2025, and project construction is expected to be completed by the end of calendar 2028. DHCD also published its plan for digital equity funding received through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is expected to total about $5 million annually for the next 5 years. If you flip all the way back to page 3, that is the page that shows the summary of the DLS recommendations, including the reduction of $5 million in PAYGO for the Business Facade Improvement Program, which leaves the program fully funded with bonds, and also the recommendation to reduce funding for burning to the mandated level. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Haskell, for the analysis. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee on analysis? Great. Thank you very much. This afternoon, we have Secretary of Housing and Community Development, Secretary Day, here joining us.
Chair Chang, Vice Chair Lewis, esteemed members of the committee, good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you today. The record, my name is Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Community Development. To my left is Deputy Secretary Julia Glanz. To her left is Assistant Secretary for Neighborhood Revitalization, Carol Gilbert. To my right is Assistant Secretary Greg Hare of the Community Development Administration, and to his right, our Chief Finance Officer, Sergey Kuzminchuk. I did that without looking, so I'm just making sure. Yeah, okay, all right. So good afternoon. Pleasure again to be with you and to discuss DHCD's proposed fiscal year 2025 capital budget and the lasting impact it will have for Marylanders. The proposed capital budget will create over 46,000 jobs, generate $178 million in tax revenue, and create over $7 billion in total economic impact for the state. Investing in DHCD is truly that, an investment to provide the best bang for our taxpayers' buck. On average, every dollar of proposed DHCD capital funds is projected to leverage an additional $8 in private funds, directly generating over $4.5 billion in total private and non-DHCD public capital and program impacts. The state's investment in DHCD's proposed capital budget will create or preserve over 5,400 new housing units, create 1,500 new Maryland homeowners, protect over 390 legacy homeowners, provide energy efficiency upgrades to 4,500 affordable multifamily units, and invest in over 350 community development projects across the state. All of this investment is occurring in the context of 3 very troubling facts, and I've provided you a lot more detail in my written testimony, as well as maps of all of our investments over the past year. Those 3 facts are as follows. First, Maryland is facing a current shortage, as you heard Ms. Haskell say, of 96,000 housing units. The housing crisis has been worsening for 15 years, and the effects are families who can't afford their rent, families who can't buy a home, move into a home that fits their family. It also means young families, young people that can't leave their parents' home, and seniors who can't downsize. Ultimately, it means that some families go without a roof over their heads at all. We didn't get into this crisis overnight, and getting out of it is a resource intensive proposition, but there is a clear way out. Second, the largest city in our state has not benefited from a deliberate or data-driven partnership between state and city to respond to the vast number of vacant properties in the city. Evidence is clear that progress is being made, but overcoming the existing scale of the problem and countervailing effect of vacants on tax revenues, economic activity, and externalities of vacants requires scale and speed. And finally, Maryland's economy has grown by 1.6% in 7 years, compared to America's 13.9% growth during the same period, according to the Comptroller's recent report. Restarting Maryland's economy will require more talent and the homes to house them. I want to thank Department of Legislative Services Analyst Emily Haskell for a thorough budget analysis. First, I want to note that we agree with DLS's contingent recommendation to replace PAYGO funding for the Business Facade Improvement Program with GO bonds. But I would like to respond to the DLS recommendation to reduce funding for the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative by $15 million. The department respectfully but strenuously disagrees. Maryland's growth is stymied by missed opportunities in Baltimore. And while the increased investment into eliminating abandoned buildings through Project Core will address 765 vacant units in the city in a year, Baltimore's full potential cannot be reached without the complementary work of the Baltimore Regional Neighborhoods Initiative. Core eliminates vacant and dilapidated buildings. Bernie brings projects past the point of site preparation and to life. This will be a surge year for housing, and flat funding this critical component of DHCD's toolbox of programs will not even tip the scales. The proposed $27 million investment in Bernie will create over 1,800 jobs alone, generate $7 million in tax revenue, leverage over 6 private dollars for every state dollar in funding, and create over $306 million in total economic impact to the state. This will support an estimated 100 awards to turn community liabilities into community assets in the Baltimore region. Not funding this critical program to scale will cost the state in economic opportunities lost. I know we've got a lot of topics to cover, so I'll pause for your questions. Thank you again so much for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Secretary Day. Are there any questions for the Secretary? Vice Chair Lewis.
Sure. I had a question. First off, it's good to see you all.
Likewise.
I had a question on the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund. I just wanted to know kind of like, how's that going so far?
Mr. Vice Chair, great question. We were pleased that the fund has been increased to $12 million this year. I think we would hear from the advocates who are working diligently in that area that they remain in pursuit of additional operating support. So we acknowledge that and want to find every single way to be flexible with our dollars to provide them that support. Demand still outstrips supply. Demand is more than $12 million a year. And I'll turn to Assistant Secretary Gilbert to see if you have any specifics to add.
Thank you, Secretary Day. Carol Gilbert, Division Director for Neighborhood Revitalization. The NED program has been a great additional tool to the revitalization toolkit. We work particularly with municipal partners in the Inner Beltway of Prince George's County. And as they take on projects, they develop the capacity to do even more in their communities. So we really see NED as a fantastic vehicle, and thank the General Assembly for your support.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may, we appreciate that support. I represent a large number of those municipalities in the Inner Beltway of Prince George's County that desperately need that help. I would love to follow up with some of you guys offline and see kind of like how we can coalesce some of the blue line corridor stuff that we're doing along with what you guys are doing to make sure there's not duplication of effort, but also scaling. That would be great. And I look forward to following up with you all.
Absolutely, Mr. Vice Chair. We'll follow up after.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to see you, Secretary Day. We go back a long ways.
Yes, sir. Yes, we do.
Back to when you were a young kid swimming in my swimming pool.
That's right.
His grandfather used to be my pastor, so I'll just let that out. What is the average price for low income homes, the purchase of the home? What is the average price of that?
Delegate, again, great to see you. And, I think I probably had a little less gray hair back then. With it, hopefully comes some wisdom. The thing I would note about purchasing properties for home ownership for low income is that we don't have a program in this nation that is oriented at home ownership for a fixed income level like we do for rental purchase. I will say there is a tax credit program before Congress right now, a bipartisan bill to create something like that, which might provide something like the low income housing tax credit program that we have today. But I don't know of a precise figure that I could give you as far as an average purchase price, because again, it exists on a continuum. But if we were to identify 60% area median income or 80% area median income, I'm sure we could provide either statewide or a by county or even a by metro area. We could look at the Baltimore metro area, for example, average purchase price at those family income levels. And I think we could probably follow up with you on it. Assistant Secretary Hare, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, Secretary, I think you covered it. It's really, again, it's a lot based on market conditions. So we don't, the program doesn't exist today, but we're closely following the federal legislation.
I asked that for a reason. In my area, there are a lot of apartments that are owned by out-of-state folks. And my thought was that maybe the county or the state could purchase them. First of all, make a rule that any apartments or something that comes up for sale, that the county or the state gets first right of refusal. That way you could probably turn those into condominiums with a little upgrade, so forth. And I'm thinking that would be a great way to enhance homeownership because you got people in there.
Yes, sir. If I can, just a thought, and I'll try to keep my remarks to the capital budget, but there is legislation that would acknowledge that there might be other pathways, like you're talking about, to try to keep people housed. In light of a shortage of housing units, one of the ways in which we can help people affordably stay in their homes and become homeowners is through exactly what you're talking about, or a right of first refusal. And for small unit 1, 2, 3, and 4 plexes in the state, there is legislation under the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act that would create a right of first refusal for them to purchase the property from the landlord.
Thank you. I'm just thinking above, and I'm on the capital budget thing, so I'm just thinking.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Doug and Metzger. Any other questions from members of the subcommittee for the agency? I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank the secretary and also the agency for submitting this response about the DL's recommendations. And my question specifically refers to the Bernie program. Appreciate the list of projects that are listed here. And an observation that, from personal observation, I looked at as far as, are there any projects that can be highlighted within the Brooklyn area, specifically South Baltimore? The reason why I mention that is because, as everyone knows, that in July of 2023, we had the worst mass shooting in the city's history right there in Brooklyn Homes. And I know, being from Anne Arundel, myself and colleagues in Baltimore City and surrounding jurisdictions, we really, have had that area in our hearts, and there's a lot of connections there. And I think it's important for, especially that program there, to have those critical investments. So I do appreciate these items that are listed here, or these communities that are listed here, which is very much appreciated. I think the closest one is Cherry Hill. I think that if we can continue to do more in the Brooklyn area, specifically the Brooklyn Homes, I think it's very important.
Chair Chang, thank you for calling attention to that, and I'll turn it over to Assistant Secretary Gilbert in just a second, because I see her writing notes down, so she may have information at her fingertips that I don't. But I will note that we've been thinking about that since that tragic day, and orienting and ensuring that we can, both by statute and by regulation, orient Project Core dollars into Brooklyn and Curtis Bay neighborhoods, as well as Community Health and Safety Works funds, which is a capital program that is not currently mandated, but for which we have funds in FY24, and is a crime prevention through environmental design capital program, among other things, but is really oriented toward community safety. Ensuring that those dollars reach Brooklyn is important to us as well. And Bernie is no exception, Bernie as well. So Carol, do you have anything you want to add?
Thank you, Secretary. The main thing I wanted to add is that the Greater Baybrook Coalition is the Bernie partner through which we channel resources to that part of Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County. And they are a very effective organization. And in fact, they've been holding weekly community fora to keep in touch with what the community priorities are for reinvestment. So they are a very active partner, and I think a great vehicle for addressing what happened last year.
And Chair, we'll get you a list of recent awards to and FY24 awards to Greater Baybrook and can give you a map of precisely where they've gone as well, if that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much, ma'am. And I just, whatever we can do to continue to focus on this area here, the community, not just in Baltimore City, but the surrounding areas, they're still hurting. There's still a lot of sensitivity and emotions there. One of the young ladies who lost her life there, she was actually a graduate of my alma mater. And so, you know, to see a life that was cut so short, it's really, you know, really, we can do more to help that area. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, can I offer one other thought on that point? You highlight something that I'm still trying to help my colleagues understand within the executive branch of state government, and I'm trying to understand every day what they do. Earlier today, we met with representatives of the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, as well as Juvenile Services, on this very topic. And, you know, rather than working in silos, as we often do, we're trying to braid our efforts. And one of the points that I think you're illustrating is that we have capital dollars where they have significant operating resources, and our capital dollars can have an impact on neighborhoods that might not be perceived as directly related to public safety or changing the outcomes for a kid that grows up in that neighborhood. But these are the long-term investments that will shape the effects that those neighborhoods will experience long-term, whether that's more eyes on the street and more public, you know, better public safety outcomes in the immediate term, or long-term changing how a young person growing up in that neighborhood feels about the space around them, you know, from the parks to the schools to the housing. So I think this is a really important point to illustrate that you know, I'm trying to convey laterally within the executive branch as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much for the collaborative spirit that you have with the different agencies. Really appreciate it. Are there any other questions from members of the subcommittee for Secretary Day and the Department of Housing and Community Development? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Next, we have a series of witnesses who will provide testimonies to each of the witnesses. They have 2 minutes each. And first, we have Ronald Spohr, Habitat for Humanity, Metro Maryland Incorporated. How about Claudia Wilson with the Community Development Network of Maryland? And then Dana Johnson, Homes for America. Elizabeth Reichelt, Build Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development. William Moore, Southway Builders Incorporated. Miranda Willems with the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. We could start with you and then go down. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Spohr. I work with Habitat for Humanity, Metro Maryland. Habitat for Humanity, Metro Maryland urges your support of the 2025 DHCD capital budget. Habitat for Humanity, Metro Maryland is a nonprofit organization serving Prince George's and Montgomery counties. Habitat builds and rehabilitates homes in partnership with income qualified buyers and community volunteers. We sell homes with affordable mortgages, providing opportunities for stable, secure home ownership and generational wealth building for income eligible buyers. Habitat also offers a home preservation program that helps lower income homeowners make necessary health, safety, accessibility, and climate resiliency improvements to their homes. DHCD's capital funding is critical to help organizations expand capacity and serve more Maryland residents. Habitat Metro Maryland has found National Capital Strategic Economic Development Funds, NED, particularly useful and flexible. We recently used NED funds to convert a single family home into a duplex in the Tacoma Park area, providing much needed affordable homeownership opportunities in a high cost area. Habitat also uses NED funds to provide critical home repairs and climate resiliency measures for existing low income homeowners. Habitat is excited to see NED funded at $12 million in the proposed budget. While NED funds are of interest to Habitat, we encourage the committee to fully fund the entire DHCD budget. As you know, Marylanders face considerable housing challenges. It is imperative that we act to ensure all Marylanders have the opportunity for safe and affordable housing, and that residents with lower and moderate incomes can build generational wealth through home ownership. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network. We are a statewide network of housing and community development partners. I just wanted to thank everybody at the Department of Housing and Community Development for their outstanding work with our members across the state. And today I would like to speak strongly in support of DHCD's capital budget allocations as they are. I just want to emphasize that our members use all of the programs that are in front of you today. So Bernie, Ned, CORE, Rental Housing Works, these are all programs that our members use to bring vital community revitalization and housing programs statewide. And without this capital funding, we could not do the work that we do statewide. Our members could not do the work that they do statewide. So this is vital funding, critical for communities, critical for us to address the affordable housing crisis, and critical for us to make great places throughout the state. A couple of things I just want to emphasize. We really need operating support along with this capital support. So currently there is $750,000, excuse me, $750,000 of operating board to move $39 million worth of capital support. And it's just inadequate to move that much capital in the budget. So I hope we can find additional capital funds to support the work. The other point that I want to make is the rental housing program, while a significant investment in rental housing programs has been made in this budget, it's still not enough to move the $200 million worth of projects that are stuck in the pipeline. Those are projects that have already been approved by the department, but can't move and have basically been stuck throughout the pandemic. So I urge your support for the DHCD's capital budget, and thank you so much for your time today. Bill.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Reichelt, and I am one of the lay co-chairs of BUILD, which stands for Baltimoreans United in Leadership Development, which is a broad-based grassroots citizens power organization that has been in Baltimore City since 1977 and has a track record of creating significant change amongst the communities where our member institutions are located, both relative to housing, public safety, education, and other things. So thank you for having us here today. As you, I think, are aware, Baltimore City is facing a crisis of vacant and abandoned homes. Not only are there more than 13,000 vacant and abandoned buildings, there are 21,000 vacant lots across the city, plus tens of thousands more houses that are at risk of becoming vacant because they are located adjacent to these vacant homes and vacant lots. This isn't new. It's rooted in our city's long history of destructive and racially discriminatory housing policies and practices, including redlining, which was pioneered in Baltimore just over a century ago. And this crisis is not only affecting Baltimore City, but it's a drag on the state. It's affecting state revenues. And so it's in this context that we are here to say that we strongly support the governor's investment in Project CORE and Bernie because we know it can be transformative. It offers an opportunity to make a long-term investment in the state's largest city. And studies have shown that if taken at scale, we could increase revenues, state revenues by $170 million annually. That's on top of local Baltimore City revenues if we make this investment over the long term. And these other investments in housing across the state have the potential to be equally transformative for our state by tackling one of Maryland's central challenges in affordability. One point I want to make in addition to tackling affordability is the conversation we just had about safety, and that BUILD's track record in working with Rebuild Metro and other partners in East Baltimore over the past 15 years. We made an investment of over $120 million. And as a result of that, the murder rate has decreased by over 50% in those communities. And that is a direct example of capital investment creating public safety improvements. And our vision is that this increased quality of life and increased safety should be across our city and not just in a few select neighborhoods. And so with that, I'm here to say that we take these proposed investments in housing in Baltimore and across our state. Our state's future depends on it.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairman Chang, Vice Chair Lewis, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Miranda Darden-Willems, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition that includes 185 member organizations that use DHCD financing to build, own, and manage affordable rental housing communities across Maryland. We were here for our annual Housing Day a few weeks ago, and we met with many of you to talk about the rental projects in your districts and the challenges developers face trying to build new affordable housing communities. I am here today in strong support of the governor's proposed budget for DHCD's rental housing programs. Right now, there are 75 affordable housing projects under review at DHCD that need rental housing works funds, which would create or preserve nearly 8,700 affordable homes and leverage $2.6 billion in other investment. But without more funding, these projects cannot move forward as the current year funds have all been allocated. The $110 million in the governor's budget for rental housing works would allow about 40% of these shovel-ready projects to move forward as soon as the fiscal year begins. This amount of funding is adequate to clear much of the backlog of projects at DHCD. They have the staff in place to close these loans, and they will expend all of the funds during the next fiscal year. For every $10 million you cut, that's 3 projects that cannot close next year. We know there are many important priorities that all need more funding, but this program is a solid investment of state dollars, as every $1 invested in rental housing works leverages $11 in other investment. Full funding will allow us to continue our important work building more affordable rental units to help solve the current housing crisis and improve our economy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is William Moore. I am president of Southway Builders Incorporated. We are a Baltimore City-based general contractor. We've been in business since 1991. Actually, our first project that put us in business was an affordable housing deal. And we have been building affordable housing deals, multiple ones every year for those last 33 years. The demand for affordable housing, as you heard Secretary Day say, is in excess of 96,000 units. And the lack of these units is hindering the state's ability to grow. In recent years, there have been enormous pressures on the fiscal viability of affordable housing projects that are trying to be built. As you've heard, there are multiple projects stuck in pipeline due to cost pressures, from everything from significant increases in construction costs to higher interest rates. The rental housing works dollars are the vehicle to bridge those challenges. Unlike other state programs that pay for products and services, these monies are loans, and they get paid back with interest. It's really important to realize that. The proposed rental housing works investment will create just the rental housing works portion. I think you heard Secretary Day talking about the overall funds, but just the rental housing works portion will create over 14,700 jobs. And those are with family supporting wages. The $132.5 million state investment in rental housing works, rental housing program, partnership rental housing will all generate at least an estimated 187 million of subcontracting opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. So I thank you for your time, and I respectfully request that you support the proposed DHCD budget. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to all the witnesses. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for this panel witnesses? Great. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you. Next, we have the following witnesses. Miss John Dre Jennings with Druid Heights CDC. Linda Hannafin with the Anne Arundel Connecting Together Incorporated. Shalonda Stokes Downtown Partnership of Baltimore. Ellen Burke, City Life Community Builders. Monsieur Abdul Malik, the NHP Foundation. Alice Kennedy, Baltimore City Housing and Community Development. Thank you very much for being here. We can start on this end here.
With me. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Burke, and I'm the Executive Director of City Life Community Builders. We are a nonprofit working on housing redevelopment, community development, and workforce training in disinvested East Baltimore neighborhoods. In our role as a Bernie representative, we also lead efforts to promote housing and economic development through supporting others to obtain the resources they need to be effective. We would like to thank you for the support you have provided to DHCD over the years. This has enabled DHCD to deploy funding to the most underserved communities in our state. Without the Bernie and core funding we received, we never could have completed the Hohen Lithograph project in East Baltimore. This 85,000 square foot historic complex consists of 3 historic buildings and 2 warehouse buildings. It required 26 funding sources, including federal funds, to complete. Today, this building is completely leased, with the majority of tenants being nonprofits, such as Associated Builders and Contractors, which operates the largest apprenticeship program in the region for construction training. Morgan State University has opened 5 research centers at home, which include the Center for Urban Health Equity, Center for Urban Violence and Crime Reduction, and the National Center for the Elimination of Educational Disparities. Another project that would have been impossible without DHCD funding is the Henderson Crossing Housing Project, which consists of 44 for-sale homes. To date, this has brought 32 wonderful new families to the community who are contributing to the state's goal of creating generational wealth through home ownership. 5 new babies have been born on these blocks in just the last year. DHCD's support of City Life's for-sale housing rehabilitation in the Oliver community contributed to a true transformation of this community. Our initial renovations of scattered site housing and targeted blocks brought many additional nonprofit and for-profit developers, eliminated blight, hazardous conditions, and illegal activities on entire blocks, and helped build a community that recently came together to save the K-8 school in Oliver that Baltimore City had slated to close. I would like to urge you to support the Bernie and core funding for DHCD so that we can all continue this very challenging and important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Shalonda Stokes, President of Downtown Partnership of Baltimore, and it's my honor to present before you this afternoon and urge full support of the funding specified in Governor Moore's fiscal 25 budget for Project Core, and as it's known, creating opportunities for revitalization and equity. This vital initiative of Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development has been a sustaining force post-COVID, especially for downtown, when people were talking about downtowns being dead. We needed this most then, and it also paves the way for new green space, new affordable and mixed-use housing, as well as new and expanded opportunities for small businesses to grow and innovate. CORE is directly responsible for jobs, economic growth, and enhancing the quality of life in downtown Baltimore. Governor Moore said it best, it's Maryland's decade, but it's Baltimore's time. And in our 40-year history of our organization, it has never been more important than now. Building on the focus and momentum with downtown Baltimore as the heart of our city's business, tourism, and economic sectors, increasingly where there are tens of thousands of residents who call it home. Over the past 2 years, core funding has designated for Downtown Partnership has enabled us to be an even stronger partner to the city of Baltimore and a reliable resource for businesses and organizations who rely on our essential services. Within our 106 block designation, we provide safety, support, economic development, and marketing. We provide our core services 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It is our intention to put this additional funding for this year to further invest in the state of good repair, sidewalks, graffiti removal, tree planting, and importantly, eliminating blight. Overall, when we talk about just downtown Baltimore, it's a place where our residents, our visitors come. We have 26 museums, 20 parks, 4 libraries, 59 public artworks, major theaters. Our sports and entertainment lives there, and safety, economic development, and all of this is important for our city, and just urge your support of this. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Chairman Chang and members, Chairman Chang, Vice Chair Lewis, and members of the subcommittee. Alice Kennedy, Housing Commissioner for the City of Baltimore with the Department of Housing and Community Development, here on behalf of Mayor Scott and the administration. Baltimore City appreciates the opportunity to comment and review on the Department of Housing and Community Development's capital budget for fiscal year 25. The housing and neighborhood revitalization funds have supported significant investment into the city neighborhoods, businesses, and our community-based projects over the years. They've created jobs, they've reduced crime, they've spurred investment, and they have increased our tax base. Much remains to be done, but the city is already seeing visible and long-lasting results of our enduring partnership with the state. We want to thank Governor Moore and Secretary Day and his team for their continued partnership and work in this area. In 2019, the City Department of Housing and Community Development released its comprehensive framework for community development, and we've been implementing that since 2020. Critically, the framework provides communities and stakeholders with the opportunity to guide revitalization efforts, which is based on comprehensive, data-driven, block-level planning. State DHCD capital funds will support investment, redevelopment, that will reduce crime and support reduced crime. They support education outcomes, health outcomes. They support almost every single outcome that is related to a human being on this planet and the comprehensive outcomes of our communities. Most importantly, the state DHCD funds provide healing for communities that have endured racist housing policies and decades of disinvestment. All of the funds, the strategic core funds, Bernie, the rental housing works funds, the community legacy funds, our seed community development anchor institution funds, all work in concert to support holistic and comprehensive community development and comprehensive holistic outcomes. We highly recommend, that's my own timer, we highly recommend and encourages the committee to give the city's recommendation for full consideration of state DHC's budget at the funding levels provided, if not increased. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Chang and members of the House and Capital Budget Subcommittee. My name is Joan Dre Jennings. I'm the Executive Director of Druid Heights Community Development Corporation. Druid Heights Development Corporation urges you, your support for full support and full funding for Department of Housing and Community Development capital budget. Druid Heights Development Corporation celebrates 50 years this year, and we are a community-based 501c3 that, of course, is located in Baltimore City, 21217, and we work on the urban renewal area. Our mission is to cause, encourage, and promote community self-empowerment through the development of economic, educational, employment, and affordable housing opportunities. While we are very grateful to see a historic increase in funding for the rental housing programs, community revitalization, strategic demolition, as well as Bernie funds, the capital budget funding from the state helps to assist the capital projects in communities such as Druid Heights. And as I say, West is the best, West Baltimore. So we're looking to see the increase in the budget as well as continued funding support. These funding and operating support and capital support assist with capital projects. In Druid Heights, for example, we were able to build our Bakersview homeownership project. We were able to stabilize a vacant block, the 2200 block, 16 units in the 2200 block of Druid Hill. And we're also able to assist with blight and transformation of green space in projects such as our Gold Street project. The creation of over 60 homes in West Baltimore helps to provide generational wealth and assist in sustaining in commercial corridors such as Pennsylvania and North Avenue. So we urge you, although I know you've heard this several times, it's not enough. We urge you to support the full funding of the capital and operating and increase as well for all funds, including Bernie and the core. Thank you so much for your time.
Good afternoon, Chairman Chang and committee members. My name is Mansour Abdul Malik. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for the NHP Foundation. We are a nonprofit affordable housing developer with offices in Baltimore City, and we service residents throughout the state of Maryland. I'm here to strongly advocate support for DHCD's full budget, in particular its Rental Housing Works Program budget. These funds are needed for a number of different reasons. My colleagues, many of them have already spoken on many of the points, including jobs, but also I want to make sure you understand what these monies mean. For example, a project in West Baltimore, we're working with the state and the city called Park Heights in order for us to redevelop 17 acres. The first senior building represents many things. First, it is new infrastructure that will help the adjacent neighborhoods as well as our site. Next, those senior units represent an opportunity for legacy homeowners that cannot stay in their home, be able to stay in their neighborhood and be in an accessible building, which then allows their family members to come in and be able to stay in that home. That's true neighborhood revitalization. These funds help people, jobs, the environment. And I want to make sure that it's very, very clear when you're considering this budget that we cannot lose a single dime. If anything, we need more in order for us to continue to do the good work that CDA and DHCD is continuing to do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to all the witnesses. Are there any questions from members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee for these witnesses? Delegate Grist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the last panel mentioned that these are loans and not direct subsidies. Is that correct?
Correct.
And these are generally, you say you build these structures, whether they're homes or they're complexes, and then you rent them out after these. And who does the property management rentals on that? Is it you guys or?
It depends. NHP Foundation does not do self-management. Instead, we work with a third party to be able to manage those properties.
Okay, so what if, I know that these are tough times for everybody, and obviously one of the biggest expenses that people have is housing. And what if you guys don't collect these rents and you don't collect enough money to be able to make those payments back to the state? What happens at that point?
Well, CDA and DHCD have been very good about making sure that underwriting is done thoroughly on those projects in order to be able to deal with some economic fluctuations. That includes being able to have operating reserves that will be able to help through some tougher times. But therein lies where additional support is going to be needed, because what we're finding is that renters are still having some continued effects from the COVID-19 pandemic, and being able to make rental payments on time can be troublesome. So in this instance, we have inherently in our project some level of I don't want to call it cushion, but I would say there's a opportunity for us to deal with some of those economic fluctuations, but there's still help from the renter side.
So the third party, how aggressive are they in collecting those rents?
The third party is really instructed to be able to go as aggressive as the owner will tell them. We are wholly understanding of the economic conditions that our renters are in. Like, we are not in the business of evicting people, all right? We are in the business of keeping people in their homes. However, we need to make sure that the properties are financially viable, because it also represents housing stability for 100 other residents, depending on how large a property is. So there's a balance that's there. One of the things that we do at NHP is we provide services, which many of our colleagues do as well, which includes being able to help folks with rental assistance and education in order for them to be able to get better jobs, et cetera. So it's all tied together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Delegate Grice. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Great, thank you to all the witnesses here, and we'll call the next set of witnesses. Christine Madigan with the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. Brian Alston with Bond Secures Community Works. Ellen James with the Central Baltimore Partnership Incorporated. Just to double check, we called the names earlier, just check one more time. Dana Johnson with Homes for America. And then Linda Hannafin with Anne Arundel Connecting Together. Okay, great, thank you very much. You start.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I'm Ellen James, Executive Director of the Central Baltimore Partnership, which is a partnership of almost 200 organizations working to revitalize 11 neighborhoods in the heart of Central Baltimore. We had actually meant to sign up our Director of Commercial Revitalization, Jack Dana, who can talk with you about the remarkable impact of the Bernie program in Central Baltimore. So I'd like to bring him up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you, Owen and Maryland DHCD for this opportunity. In my 25 years of urban planning, I can't say without enough passion how these Bernie funds, community legacy, project core funds really have an impact, not just on Baltimore City commercial corridors, but really all of your communities. They help the local pizza shop. They help your business district line their streets with pedestrian lighting, to make them more welcoming and safe places to shop and expand. And thirdly, from a macro sense, they help the newest business reactivate and reimagine a vacant storefront to expand opportunities to local residents. And then in Central Baltimore, in the Station North Arts District, on a very local level, these funds have been instrumental, again, in reducing the commercial vacancy rate in 1 year by 15%. Second, we have attracted 6 new businesses along North Avenue and North Charles Street in the Arts District, notably Mobtown Ballroom, which is anchoring in an interim way, but we hope in a long-term way, the historic North Avenue market. Third, we have supported 20 small emerging creative artists and entrepreneurs and pop-ups, critical funds to enable them to scale up, test the market, and sustain growth and have a bigger impact to reimagine, but also to secure successful businesses along our commercial district. In just the last year, the $1 million that I've had the opportunity to program in Station North and Central Baltimore, we have been able to leverage that with 10 million in private investment, a great return, small investment by the state, but a big impact at the local community. And finally, in closing remarks, we take the opportunity to thank you for helping us support the governor's quest, and we urge you all to fully support the governor's full budget for DHCD. Thanks for this opportunity, and no doubt more exciting opportunity to come and work.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start with the Comptroller's recent report on the state of the Maryland economy. From an economic development standpoint, the report says, quote, "Housing is a major issue as both businesses and residents require affordable and available housing across all income levels to thrive." Good afternoon, Chair Chang, Vice Chair Lewis, and members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee. My name is Christine Madigan. I am the president of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition, and you heard from our executive director earlier. I'm also president of Enterprise Community Development, which owns and operates nearly 70 affordable communities across the state. The Comptroller's report was based on Bureau of Research analysis, supplemented by roundtable discussions with stakeholders across many sectors. And quote, housing availability and affordability was the top concern in every roundtable across the state, the report said. Roundtable participants shared specific stories of prospective businesses turning down potential location plans to Maryland due to insufficient workforce housing. The governor's proposed capital budget will help close the housing supply gap needed to attract and retain Maryland businesses. The capital budget for rental housing programs, or RHP for short, will allow the state to capitalize on its strong pipeline of affordable housing development projects, which you heard about earlier, and get started on construction of many of them. Importantly, from an economic development perspective, rental housing programs also boost the Maryland economy in other ways. And you heard earlier about the 11-to-1 ratio of state dollars to private investment. That private investment includes private debt and private tax credit equity investments through the federal tax credit program. I urge you to support in full the capital budget for rental housing programs to support the Maryland workforce and grow the state's economy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. Are there any questions from members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee for any of these witnesses here? Great. Thank you very much. And just to verify, are there any other witnesses who sign up to speak? Okay, great. Well, that ends the hearing for the Department of Housing and Community Development. That also ends the hearing for the Capital Budget Subcommittee today. Have a great evening.